Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Perfect Lives. Matt Anthony adjusted his tie as he walked through the spacious foyer of his suburban mansion. At 38, he was the picture of success, a cybersecurity consultant who'd built his company from the ground up, now worth 8 figures. His penetrating green eyes and methodical mind had made him one of the most sought-after experts in corporate digital security. "Dad, when are they starting the kitchen?" 12-year-old Oliver called from the living room, not looking up from his video game. "Steve and his crew should be here any minute," Matt replied, checking his watch. The kitchen renovation had been Lindsay's idea, their final home improvement project, she'd said. After 15 years of marriage, she claimed she wanted to create new memories in their dream kitchen. Lindsay Anthony descended the stairs, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. At 35, she still turned heads wherever she went. She worked as a real estate agent for high-end properties, a job that kept her busy with clients at all hours. Her blue eyes sparkled with an excitement that Matt had come to associate with her renovation projects. "I can't wait to see the new design come to life," she said, kissing Matt's cheek. "Brian from the design firm will be stopping by later to check on the progress." Matt nodded absently. Brian English had been Lindsay's business partner for the past 3 years, handling the staging and interior design aspects of her luxury property sales. The man rubbed Matt the wrong way. Too smooth, too eager to please Lindsay, but he couldn't deny Brian's success in the business. "Anna, breakfast." Lindsay called upstairs to their 10-year-old daughter. The sound of heavy trucks pulling into their driveway interrupted the morning routine. Through the window, Matt saw Steve Black's construction crew unloading equipment. Steve was a third-generation contractor, known throughout the county for his craftsmanship and discretion. Matt had chosen him specifically because Steve's family had worked on some of the oldest homes in the area, including several properties with interesting histories. Steve Black was a mountain of a man with calloused hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His grandfather had built half the town, and Steve had inherited both the family business and an uncanny ability to read the bones of old houses. At 52, he'd seen everything from hidden safes to Prohibition-era tunnels. "Morning, Matt," Steve said as he approached the front door. "Ready to tear into that kitchen?" "All yours," Matt replied. "Lindsay's got the plans if you need them." As the crew began setting up, Matt gathered his laptop and briefcase. He had a big client presentation that afternoon, a Fortune 500 company that had suffered a major data breach. These were the cases that had built his reputation, finding the unfindable, exposing the hidden vulnerabilities that others missed. "I'll be back around 6, Matt told Lindsay. "Try not to let them destroy the whole house." Lindsay laughed, the sound light and carefree. "It's going to be perfect. You'll see." Matt drove to his office, a sleek building downtown that housed Anthony's cybersecurity solutions. His team of 20 specialists handled everything from corporate espionage to identity theft cases. What most people didn't know was that Matt's real expertise lay in digital forensics, tracking down evidence that people thought they'd hidden forever. The morning flew by as Matt prepared for his presentation. Between meetings, he found himself thinking about the renovation. Something about Lindsay's enthusiasm felt forced, almost manic. She'd been different lately, more secretive about her phone calls, staying out later with clients, and pushing hard for this particular renovation project. His assistant knocked on his door. "Matt, your wife called. She said there's been a change of plans with the renovation, but not to worry about it." Matt frowned. "What kind of change?" "She didn't say. Just that she'd explain when you got home." The presentation went flawlessly, as usual. Matt's client was impressed by his thorough analysis of their security vulnerabilities. But throughout the afternoon, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His instincts had served him well in both business and life. They were telling him to pay attention now. As he drove home that evening, Matt noticed Brian English's silver BMW parked in his driveway. The man was there more often lately, always with some excuse about staging or design consultations. Matt made a mental note to ask Lindsay about it. The house was unusually quiet when he entered. Usually, The sounds of construction would echo through the walls, but today there was only silence. Matt set down his briefcase and called out, "Lindsay? Kids?" "We're in the backyard," came Lindsay's voice, slightly strained. Matt walked through the house toward the back door, noting the plastic sheeting that now covered the kitchen entrance. Steve's tools were scattered around, but there was no sign of the contractor himself. In the backyard, he found Lindsay, Brian, and both children sitting at the patio table. Oliver and Anna looked confused, while Lindsay appeared nervous. Brian wore his usual confident smile, but there was something different in his eyes, something calculating. "Where's Steve?" Matt asked. "He had to leave early," Lindsay said quickly. "Family emergency. He'll be back tomorrow to finish up." Matt studied her face. In 15 years of marriage, he'd learned to read Lindsay's tells. The slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, the way she avoided direct eye contact, she was lying. "Dad," the contractor man looked really scared, Anna said innocently. "He was talking to Mr. English about something in the wall." Brian's smile faltered for just a moment. "Just some old wiring issues. Nothing to worry about." Matt felt a chill run down his spine. His cybersecurity training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming that something was very wrong in his own home. As the family headed inside for dinner, Matt made a decision. Tonight, he would start digging into his own life with the same thoroughness he applied to his clients' cases. Whatever Lindsay and Brian were hiding, he was going to find it. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Matt barely slept that night. Every creak of the house made him alert. Every shadow seemed to hold secrets. He rose before dawn and checked on the children, both sleeping peacefully in their rooms. Lindsay lay beside him, seemingly undisturbed, but Matt noticed her phone face down on the nightstand, which was unusual. At 6 a.m., he heard vehicles in the driveway. Through the bedroom window, he saw Steve Black's truck, but the contractor wasn't unloading equipment. Instead, Steve sat in his cab, engine running, staring at the house with an expression Matt had never seen before: fear. Matt dressed quietly and slipped outside through the front door. Steve noticed him approaching and rolled down his window, his weathered face pale despite the morning sun. "Steve? Everything all right?" The contractor looked around nervously. "Mr. Anthony, I need to talk to you." "Not here. Can you meet me at Murphy's Diner in 20 minutes? "What's this about?" "Just please. And don't tell your wife." 20 minutes later, Matt sat across from Steve in a corner booth at the local diner. The contractor's hands shook as he lifted his coffee cup. "I've been building and renovating houses for 30 years, Steve began. "My grandfather told me stories about the old days, about houses with secrets, but I never thought." He trailed off, staring into his cup. "Steve, what did you find in my wall?" The contractor reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. With trembling fingers, he showed Matt a photo. The image was dark and grainy, taken with the phone's flashlight, but clear enough to make Matt's blood run cold. Behind the kitchen wall, in a hidden cavity, were stacks of plastic-wrapped packages. But it wasn't drugs or money, it was photographs. Hundreds of them, scattered and bundled. Even in the poor lighting, Matt could make out faces. Young faces. Children's faces. "There's more," Steve whispered. "Documents. Names. Addresses. And..." He swiped to another photo. "This." The second image showed a small digital storage device and what appeared to be a list of locations. At the top of the list, in Lindsay's handwriting, were the words "acquisition schedule." Matt felt sick. How long has this been there? The cavity was sealed recently. Maybe 6 months, based on the drywall compound. But Mr. Anthony... Steve leaned forward. "Yesterday evening, after I found this, your wife's business partner showed up. He knew exactly where to look. He wasn't surprised. Brian English. He offered me $50,000 to forget what I saw. When I refused, he made it clear that my family's safety depended on my silence." Steve's voice cracked. "I've got grandchildren, Mr. Anthony, but I can't live with this." Matt's mind raced, processing the implications. His wife, the mother of his children, was involved in something that required hiding evidence behind walls. And Brian English was in on it. "I need you to do something for me," Matt said, pulling out his own phone. I need you to go back to the house and continue working as if nothing happened. Can you do that? Steve nodded reluctantly. What about the evidence? Leave it exactly where it is. But I need you to install something for me. Matt showed Steve a small device from his cybersecurity kit. It's a wireless camera, battery-powered, motion-activated. Hide it where it can monitor that wall cavity. You think they'll come back for it? I'm counting on it. After Steve left, Matt sat in his car outside the diner, fighting waves of nausea. The woman he'd loved for 15 years, the mother of his children, was involved in something that required hiding evidence. The implications were too horrific to fully process. He called his office and cleared his schedule, then drove to a secure facility across town where he kept sensitive equipment for high-level cybersecurity operations. From a locked safe, he retrieved several devices, GPS trackers, listening devices, and a sophisticated phone cloning tool that could mirror Lindsay's communications. Matt Anthony had spent years hunting digital predators and exposing corporate criminals. Now, he would turn those same skills on his own family. Returning home, he found Lindsay in the living room, talking quietly on her phone. She ended the call quickly when she saw him. "You're home early," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Wanted to check on the renovation progress." In the kitchen, Steve was working normally, installing new cabinets with professional efficiency. He caught Matt's eye briefly and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The camera was in place. "Brian stopped by again this morning," Lindsay said casually. "He wanted to review the staging timeline for the Pemberton property." Matt knew the Pemberton property, a massive estate Lindsay had been trying to sell for months. A lot of coordination for one listing. It's a complicated sale. International buyers, multiple inspections. You know how it is. Matt didn't know how it was. He'd investigated enough money laundering operations to recognize the language. International buyers, multiple inspections, complicated sales, all phrases that could cover a multitude of illegal activities. That afternoon, while Lindsay took the children to soccer practice, Matt began his investigation in earnest. Using techniques he'd perfected in corporate espionage cases, he deployed GPS trackers on both Lindsay's car and Brian's BMW. He installed keystroke loggers on Lindsay's laptop and cloned her phone to mirror all calls and texts to a secure device. By evening, he had established a complete surveillance network around his own family. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his career protecting people from exactly this kind of invasion of privacy. But as he tucked Oliver and Anna into bed that night, listening to their innocent chatter about school and friends, Matt knew he had to see this through. Whatever Lindsay and Brian were involved in, whatever those photographs and documents represented, his children's safety depended on uncovering the truth. Later that night, as Lindsay slept beside him, Matt's cloned phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Package confirmed for tomorrow night. Same location. Everything must be ready." The response came from Lindsay's phone. "B has handled the contractor problem. We're clear to proceed." Matt stared at the messages, his heart pounding. Tomorrow night, whatever operation they were running would continue, and he would be ready for them. Chapter 3. Unraveling Truth. Matt spent the morning in his home office, ostensibly working on client cases while actually monitoring the feeds from his surveillance network. The wireless camera Steve had hidden near the wall cavity showed no activity, but the GPS trackers told a different story. At 9:17 a.m., Lindsay's car had made an unscheduled stop at a warehouse district across town. She'd stayed there for exactly 37 minutes before proceeding to her real estate office. Brian's BMW had been at the same location, arriving 20 minutes before Lindsay and leaving 5 minutes after her. Matt pulled up property records for the warehouse. The building was owned by a shell company called Meridian Holdings, registered in Delaware with minimal public information. Using his cybersecurity tools, he dug deeper into the company's digital footprint. What he found made his stomach turn. Meridian Holdings had connections to 3 other properties in different states. Cross-referencing the addresses with federal databases, Matt discovered that 2 of these locations had been raided by the FBI in the past 18 months. The charges: human trafficking and exploitation of minors. The 3rd location was still active. Matt's phone buzzed with another mirrored message from Lindsay's device. This time it was a photo, a young girl, maybe 13, with frightened eyes. Below the image was a price, $50,000. Matt rushed to the bathroom and vomited. When he returned to his desk, there were more messages. Location coordinates, pickup times, client preferences. His wife wasn't just involved in trafficking, she was running a procurement operation. The front door slammed, announcing Lindsay's return. Matt quickly secured his monitoring devices and composed himself. When Lindsay entered his office, she was carrying coffee and wearing her brightest smile. "How's work going?" she asked, setting a cup on his desk. "Fine. Busy day." Matt studied her face, looking for any sign of the monster he now knew her to be. But Lindsay looked exactly as she always had, beautiful, confident, loving. "I need to run some errands this afternoon," she said. "Brian and I have a client meeting for the Pemberton property. International buyers, very exclusive. What time will you be back?" "Late. These overseas clients prefer evening meetings." She kissed his forehead. "Don't wait up." After Lindsay left, Matt called Steve Black. "The camera has been transmitting all morning," Steve reported. "No one's been near the wall. But I've got the rest of that cavity mapped out now. There's a tunnel behind it. A tunnel connects to the storm drain system. Someone could access that hiding spot from outside the house without ever entering through the doors." Matt felt pieces clicking into place. Lindsay had chosen this house specifically. The renovation wasn't about creating new memories. It was about accessing an existing network. That evening, Matt told the children he had to work late and arranged for them to sleep at their grandmother's house. Then he prepared for surveillance. He loaded his car with long-range cameras, listening devices, and a GPS tracker that could be attached to vehicles from a distance. At 9 p.m., he positioned himself near the warehouse where Lindsay and Brian had met that morning. The building appeared abandoned, but Matt's thermal imaging equipment detected heat signatures inside. Multiple people moving around. At 9:47 p.m., Brian's BMW arrived, followed by Lindsay's car and a black van. Matt used his long-range camera to document everything. Through the lens, he watched as 3 men emerged from the van. One was clearly a client, expensive suit, nervous demeanor. The other 2 were security. Lindsay and Brian led them into the warehouse. Using a parabolic microphone, Matt caught fragments of conversation, fresh inventory, premium selection, completely untraceable. His hands shook as he recorded everything. These weren't abstract criminals he was investigating. This was his wife, casually discussing the sale of human beings. At 11:15 p.m., the group emerged from the warehouse. The client appeared satisfied, shaking hands with both Lindsay and Brian. Money changed hands, thick envelopes that Brian pocketed. As the vehicles prepared to leave, Matt saw something that made his blood freeze. A figure was loaded from the warehouse into the van, small, clearly young, struggling weakly against restraints. Matt followed the van at a distance, using his GPS tracker to maintain surveillance without being detected. The van led him to an upscale neighborhood 40 minutes away, stopping at a mansion with high walls and security gates. He documented the address, the license plates, and the transfer of the victim. By the time he returned home, it was 3 a.m., and Lindsay was already asleep. The next morning, Matt contacted Detective Rosa Nixon, a federal agent he'd worked with on cybercrime cases. They met at a secure location where Matt presented his evidence. The photos from the wall cavity, surveillance footage from the warehouse, financial records he'd uncovered about Meridian Holdings, and the documented human trafficking transaction. "This is beyond local jurisdiction," Detective Nixon said grimly. "I need to bring in federal task force agents." "But Matt," she paused, "your wife is going to prison for the rest of her life. Are you prepared for that? What about my children? They'll be safe. We'll make sure of that. But you need to stay close to your normal routine until we can move. If Lindsay suspects anything, I understand. There's something else. We've been tracking this network for 2 years. Your wife and her partner are significant players, but they're not the top of the organization. We need them to lead us to the leadership." Matt nodded, though the weight of the decision pressed down on him. He would have to continue living with Lindsay, pretending everything was normal, while federal agents built their case. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Can you do it? Matt thought about the children in those photographs, about the young girl loaded into the van, about Oliver and Anna sleeping safely in their beds. I can do it. But as he drove home, Matt Anthony began planning something the federal agents didn't know about, something they wouldn't approve of. Because while Detective Nixon was focused on building a legal case, Matt was planning something much more personal. The people who had turned his wife into a monster, who had threatened his children's safety, who had used his home as part of their network, they were going to pay in ways the justice system couldn't deliver. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Patience. 2 weeks of living a lie nearly broke Matt's sanity. Every morning, he kissed Lindsay goodbye, knowing she would spend her day pricing human lives. Every evening, she returned home with stories about property showings and client meetings, while Matt's surveillance devices recorded the truth. But Matt Anthony hadn't built a cybersecurity empire by breaking under pressure. He'd learned patience from years of tracking sophisticated criminals who thought they were untouchable. Now he applied that same methodical approach to his own life. During the day, while Lindsay worked her trafficking operations, Matt coordinated with Detective Nixon's federal task force. They'd identified 17 victims in the network, ranging in age from 12 to 17. The organization spanned 4 states and had connections to international trafficking rings. More importantly, they'd identified the leadership, a man named Howard Wolf, who operated from a compound in rural Montana, and his lieutenant, Daniel Shelton, who ran the East Coast operations from a legitimate shipping company. Your wife reports directly to Shelton, Detective Nixon explained during one of their secure meetings. She's not just procurement. She's operational management for this entire region. Matt absorbed this information with cold clarity. Lindsay wasn't a victim or a reluctant participant. She was a willing architect. The federal case is solid, Nixon continued. But we need one more piece. We need documentation of the financial network. Without that, we can't seize the assets or break the money trail. What kind of documentation? Digital records, bank accounts, transaction logs, client databases. The kind of thing your wife would have access to. Matt smiled grimly. Leave that to me. That evening, while Lindsay attended another client meeting, Matt implemented the most sophisticated digital infiltration of his career. Using techniques he developed for corporate espionage, he accessed Lindsay's encrypted files, her hidden email accounts, and her secure cloud storage. What he found exceeded even the federal agents' expectations. Lindsay maintained detailed records of every transaction, every victim, every client. She documented the network's entire operation with the same meticulous attention to detail she'd once applied to real estate transactions. Client preferences, delivery schedules, financial transfers, everything was recorded. But Matt also found something else, a file labeled insurance. Opening it, he discovered that Lindsay had been documenting her own operations as protection against her partners. She'd recorded conversations with Howard Wolf and Daniel Shelton, photographed money transfers, and maintained detailed logs of every illegal activity she participated in. Lindsay had been planning to betray the network all along. The next morning, Matt called Detective Nixon with an encrypted phone. I have everything you need. Financial records, client databases, operational documentation. The entire network. How comprehensive? Comprehensive enough to shut down operations in 4 states and put 23 people in prison for life. Matt, this is incredible work, but we still need to coordinate the arrests carefully. If we move too soon, I understand, but there's something else. Matt's voice grew cold. I've found evidence that they're planning to relocate the operation. Next week, they're going to disappear. This was a lie, but Matt needed to accelerate the timeline. Because while the federal agents were building their case, Matt was building something else entirely. Over the next 3 days, Matt used his access to Lindsay's network to gather intelligence on every person involved in the operation. He learned their schedules, their security arrangements, their personal weaknesses. He identified the locations where victims were held and the routes used for transportation. Most importantly, he discovered that the network had a fatal vulnerability. Their communication system relied on encrypted messages that were automatically deleted after 48 hours. But Matt's cybersecurity expertise allowed him to intercept and preserve every message. Using this access, Matt began implementing his own plan. On Thursday evening, he sent carefully crafted messages to key members of the network, using Lindsay's credentials. Each message contained just enough information to create suspicion and paranoia. He made it appear that different members were planning to cooperate with federal investigators. By Friday morning, the network was in chaos. Howard Wolf was demanding an emergency meeting. Daniel Shelton was questioning everyone's loyalty. Lower-level operators were looking for exits. And Lindsay was panicking. "Something's wrong," she told Brian during a phone call that Matt intercepted. "Howard thinks someone's talking to the feds. He wants all regional managers of the compound by Sunday. All of us." Brian's voice was strained. "That's never happened before." He's scared. And when Howard gets scared, people disappear. Matt smiled as he listened to the conversation. His psychological manipulation was working perfectly. By creating the impression that the network was compromised, he was forcing them to make desperate moves that would expose their entire operation. But Matt had a more personal agenda than just helping the federal case. That Saturday night, while Lindsay prepared for a trip to Montana, Matt made his own preparations. In his secure workshop, he assembled equipment that would never appear in any federal evidence locker. Untraceable communication devices, surveillance gear that couldn't be traced back to him, and other tools from his cybersecurity operations that operated in legal gray areas. On Sunday morning, Lindsay kissed him goodbye, claiming she was attending a real estate conference in Denver. She would be gone for 3 days. Matt waited exactly 1 hour after her departure before implementing the final phase of his plan. Using the network's own communication system, he sent a single message to Howard Wolf. Using Daniel Shelton's credentials, federal investigation confirmed. Full network compromised. Initiating emergency protocols. Then he sent a message to Daniel Shelton. Using Howard Wolf's credentials, security breach traced to East Coast operations. Contain immediately. And finally, he sent a message to both men, using Lindsay's credentials. Evidence suggests inside betrayal. Recommend immediate shutdown of all operations and elimination of potential witnesses. Within hours, the network began destroying itself from within. As Matt monitored the chaos unfolding through his surveillance network, he felt no satisfaction, only cold determination. The federal agents would get their prosecutions and their justice system victory. But Matt Anthony was playing a longer game. By the time this was over, everyone who had threatened his family would understand exactly what happened when someone crossed a man who made his living finding people who thought they were unfindable. Chapter 5. The Web Titans. The network's self-destruction exceeded even Matt's calculated expectations. By Monday evening, intercepted communications revealed that Howard Wolf had ordered the elimination of 3 regional managers, convinced they were federal informants. Daniel Shelton had responded by moving all East Coast assets to secure locations and implementing radio silence protocols. And Lindsay was trapped in Montana, unable to communicate with anyone without confirming suspicions of betrayal. Matt coordinated with Detective Nixon to ensure the federal task force was positioned to capitalize on the chaos. "They're going to start eliminating evidence and witnesses," he warned during a secure call. "If you're going to move, it has to be now." "We're ready," Nixon confirmed. "Teams are in position at 6 locations." "But Matt, once we start this, there's no going back. Your wife will get exactly what she deserves." That Tuesday morning, as federal agents prepared for coordinated raids across 4 states, Matt received an encrypted call on Lindsay's phone. The caller ID showed Daniel Shelton. "Lindsay, thank God." Shelton's voice was strained. "Where are you?" Matt had spent days studying Lindsay's speech patterns and responses. Using a voice modulation app, he replied in her tone, "Safe house in Denver." "What's happening?" "Howard's lost his mind. He thinks you're all informants. He's ordered termination protocols for everyone below his level. All of us. Everyone. I've got teams moving to secure positions. You need to get to the secondary location in Colorado Springs. Tonight." Matt smiled grimly. The secondary location in Colorado Springs was already under federal surveillance. Shelton was unknowingly walking into a trap. Daniel, what about the evidence at my house? The backup files. Burn everything. The whole operation is compromised. Understood. After ending the call, Matt immediately contacted Detective Nixon. They're moving tonight. Colorado Springs location. And they're planning to destroy evidence at my house. We'll have teams at both locations. But Matt had already anticipated this moment. That afternoon, while federal agents prepared their operations, he drove to a secure storage facility where he'd hidden copies of every piece of evidence he'd gathered. Financial records, surveillance footage, client databases. Everything was preserved in multiple formats. The federal case would proceed regardless of what happened to the evidence in his house. But Matt's personal mission required a different approach. That evening, he waited in his darkened home office, monitoring security cameras he'd installed throughout the property. At 11:47 p.m., two figures approached the house through the storm drain tunnel that connected to the hidden wall cavity. Matt recognized both men from his surveillance, Brian English and a security contractor named Pete Shelton, Daniel's brother. They'd come to destroy the evidence and, based on intercepted communications, eliminate any witnesses who might compromise the operation. Through his security monitors, Matt watched them enter the tunnel system and approach the wall cavity. They worked efficiently, removing the hidden photographs and documents. But they didn't know about the surveillance cameras, and they didn't know that Matt had already copied everything. As they prepared to leave, Brian made a phone call. Matt's listening devices picked up both sides of the conversation. Evidence secured, Brian reported. What about the contractor? Came the reply. Daniel Shelton's voice. Steve Black? We handled that yesterday. Matt's blood ran cold. Steve Black, the contractor who discovered the evidence and tried to do the right thing, was dead. And the family? The husband and children are scheduled for tomorrow. House fire. Electrical failure during renovation. Matt closed his eyes, fighting rage that threatened to overwhelm his careful planning. They intended to murder his children to cover their tracks. But this revelation only confirmed that his approach was correct. The federal justice system would prosecute these people, but couldn't protect future victims from the network's retribution. Some threats required a more permanent solution. As Brian and Pete finished their work in the tunnel, Matt moved to the next phase of his plan. Using their own communication network against them, he sent a series of messages designed to create maximum chaos. To Howard Wolf, he sent evidence that Daniel Shelton was cooperating with federal agents. To Daniel Shelton, he sent proof that Howard Wolf had ordered his assassination. To both men, he provided location data suggesting that Brian English was providing information to federal investigators. By midnight, the entire network was in open warfare against itself. Federal raids began at 3 a.m. across 4 states. Detective Nixon's teams arrested 17 people in coordinated operations, seizing financial assets, computer systems, and rescuing 9 victims who were in immediate danger. But the leadership, Howard Wolf, Daniel Shelton, and several key operators, had already disappeared into secure locations, alerted by the network's paranoid communication patterns. Lindsay, trapped in Montana with limited communication access, became a federal fugitive when agents raided her hotel room and found only surveillance equipment indicating she'd been monitoring federal law enforcement frequencies. By dawn, the trafficking network had been shattered, but its most dangerous members remained free. And Matt Anthony was just getting started. On Wednesday morning, he received a call from an unknown number. The voice was mechanically altered, but the message was clear. Mr. Anthony, you've caused considerable disruption to our operations. We'd like to discuss terms for resolution. Who is this? Someone with significant resources and a strong interest in protecting our mutual interests. We have something you want, and you have something we need. I'm listening. Your wife is alive and in our custody. Your children's safety can be guaranteed. In exchange, you'll provide us with the locations of all evidence you've gathered, and you'll cease any cooperation with federal authorities. Matt felt ice in his veins. Prove she's alive. Check your email. The photo showed Lindsay, bound and blindfolded, holding a newspaper with yesterday's date. She appeared unharmed, but terrified. "You have 24 hours to consider our offer," the voice continued. "Instructions will follow." After the call ended, Matt sat in his office, staring at the photo. The network's leadership had survived the federal raids and was now using Lindsay as leverage to protect themselves. They'd made a fatal miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a desperate husband who would sacrifice everything to save his wife. They didn't understand that Matt Anthony had already calculated the cost of Lindsay's choices and found her life less valuable than the lives of the children she'd helped traffic. But they'd also given him exactly what he needed: a way to locate the network's leadership and finish what the federal agents couldn't complete. Matt opened his secure communication system and began the final phase of his plan. By the time this was over, the trafficking network would be permanently destroyed, and everyone who'd threatened his children would be dead. The federal justice system would handle the prosecutions. Matt Anthony would handle the rest. Chapter 6. Setting the Trap. Matt had 24 hours to craft the perfect response to the network's ultimatum. He spent the first 12 hours analyzing every piece of intelligence he'd gathered, mapping the relationships between surviving network members and identifying their psychological pressure points. Howard Wolf operated from a compound in rural Montana, but Matt's digital forensics had revealed that Wolf had a weakness: a daughter attending college in California under an assumed identity. Daniel Shelton, despite his criminal enterprises, maintained legitimate shipping operations that required regulatory compliance and public visibility. Both men thought they were untouchable in their secure locations. Matt was about to prove them wrong. On Thursday morning, he called Detective Nixon with a proposal that made her deeply uncomfortable. "You want us to let you negotiate with terrorists," she said. "I want you to let me deliver them to you," Matt corrected. "The federal case is solid, but you've only arrested the operational level. The leadership is still out there, and they'll rebuild within 6 months. What are you proposing?" "I go in as a negotiator. They want their evidence back and my silence. I give them a location for a trade, Lindsay for the files. But the location is your kill box. Matt, that's using your wife as bait. My wife helped traffic children. She's already dead to me. The question is whether we use her death to stop this permanently or let the network regroup and continue destroying lives." Nixon was quiet for a long moment. "What you're suggesting is the only way to finish this. These people murdered Steve Black and planned to kill my children. The federal court system will give them 25 to life. I'm offering you a chance to make sure they never hurt anyone again. I can't officially approve this. Then officially, you don't know about it." That afternoon, Matt responded to the network's demands with a carefully crafted proposal. He would provide the location of all evidence in exchange for Lindsay's safe return. The exchange would take place at an abandoned mining facility in Nevada, neutral territory that both sides could approach with security. What Matt didn't tell them was that the mining facility was owned by one of his cybersecurity clients, and he'd spent the past week installing comprehensive surveillance and defensive systems throughout the complex. The network's response came quickly. They would bring Lindsay to the facility at midnight Friday. Matt would arrive alone with the evidence. Any sign of federal presence would result in Lindsay's immediate execution. Matt agreed to their terms, then spent Thursday evening making preparations that would have horrified the federal agents if they'd known about them. In his secure workshop, Matt assembled equipment that fell well outside the boundaries of legal surveillance. Explosive devices designed to look like standard electronics, weapons systems that could be remotely activated, and communication jammers that would prevent anyone from calling for help. Most importantly, he prepared a final surprise for the network's leadership. A piece of malware he developed for high-level corporate espionage that could take control of any electronic device within range and turn it into a surveillance tool or weapon. On Friday morning, Matt received confirmation that Howard Wolf himself would be present at the exchange, along with Daniel Shelton and a security team of 8 men. They were bringing enough firepower to wage a small war, convinced that overwhelming force would guarantee their safety. Matt smiled as he read their operational plan, intercepted through their encrypted communications. They planned to kill him immediately after confirming the evidence location, then disappear with Lindsay as insurance against future federal investigations. They had no idea that Matt Anthony had spent 15 years learning how to turn other people's certainties against them. At 6 p.m., Matt called his children, who were staying with Lindsay's sister in California. Oliver and Anna were safe, thousands of miles from the coming confrontation, believing their parents were handling business problems. "When will Mom be home?" Anna asked. "Soon, sweetheart. Everything will be back to normal very soon." It wasn't a lie. After tonight, everything would be normal for his children. They would grieve for their mother, but they would be safe. The network that had threatened their lives would be gone forever. At 10 p.m., Matt drove toward Nevada, carrying a briefcase containing what appeared to be comprehensive evidence files. In reality, the briefcase contained decoy materials and a sophisticated explosive device that would detonate on remote command. The real evidence was already in federal custody, copied and distributed to multiple agencies to ensure the prosecutions would proceed regardless of what happened tonight. As he approached the mining facility, Matt activated the defensive systems he'd installed throughout the complex. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and automated response protocols came online. If anyone tried to leave the facility without his authorization, they would discover that the abandoned mine was now the most sophisticated kill box ever constructed by a cybersecurity expert with unlimited resources and no concern for legal boundaries. At 11:47 p.m., Matt received a message on his secure phone. "Targets approaching. Multiple vehicles. Confirm you're ready." Matt typed his response, "Ready." But the message hadn't come from Detective Nixon or the federal task force. It had come from Nate McKenna, a private military contractor Matt had worked with on corporate security operations. McKenna's team was positioned around the mining facility, armed and authorized to ensure that no one left alive except Matt. The federal agents would find the network's leadership dead and all evidence pointing to internal warfare within the trafficking organization. There would be no trial, no appeals, no chance for the network to rebuild. At midnight, headlights appeared in the distance, approaching the mining facility. Howard Wolf, Daniel Shelton, and their security team were walking into a trap that would end the network permanently. Matt Anthony had spent his career protecting people from digital predators. Tonight, he would finish the job with methods that the justice system couldn't provide. As the vehicles entered the kill box, Matt armed his final surprise: malware that would record everything that happened next and automatically upload the footage to federal authorities, providing perfect evidence of the trafficking network's violent end. The hunt was over. The reckoning was about to begin. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The mining facility at midnight looked like something from a post-apocalyptic film. Abandoned structures silhouetted against the Nevada sky, surrounded by rusted equipment and deep shafts that disappeared into darkness. Matt had chosen the location specifically for its isolation and the psychological advantage it would provide. 3 vehicles approached through the desert. A black SUV carrying Howard Wolf and Daniel Shelton, followed by 2 tactical vehicles with their security team. Matt watched through thermal imaging as 9 heavily armed men took positions around the facility, thinking they were establishing tactical superiority. They had no idea that every movement was being recorded by hidden cameras, every word picked up by directional microphones, and every electronic device they carried was now compromised by Matt's malware. At 12:07 a.m., Howard Wolf's voice echoed across the empty facility. "Anthony, show yourself." Matt emerged from a main building, briefcase in hand, moving with deliberate calm. He'd spent years negotiating with corporate criminals who thought they held all the cards. Tonight was just another negotiation, except the stakes were personal. "Where's my wife?" Matt called out. "She's safe," Daniel Shelton replied, stepping into view. Even in the moonlight, Matt could see the man's expensive suit and confident demeanor. For now, Howard Wolf appeared next, a mountain of a man with cold eyes and scarred hands. At 62, he'd built his trafficking empire through 3 decades of violence and intimidation. He looked at Matt with the casual contempt of a predator evaluating prey. "You've caused us considerable trouble, Mr. Anthony," Wolf said. "Lost us millions in assets. Got several of our people arrested. You made it personal when you threatened my children." "Nothing personal about business. Your wife was an asset. You were a security risk. Assets get protected. Risks get eliminated. Show me Lindsay. Wolf gestured to one of his men, who opened the rear door of the SUV. Lindsay stumbled out, her hands zip-tied, a blindfold covering her eyes. Even from a distance, Matt could see she was terrified. She's been very cooperative, Shelton said. Provided us with detailed information about your investigation methods. Remarkable how quickly people's loyalties change when their survival is at stake. Matt felt a cold satisfaction. Even now, Lindsay was betraying him, probably hoping her cooperation would save her life. She still didn't understand that her life had ended the moment he'd discovered those photographs in the wall. The evidence, Wolf demanded. All of it. Files, recordings, digital copies. Matt held up the briefcase. Everything's here. Financial records, client databases, surveillance footage. The complete federal investigation file. Toss it over. My wife first. Wolf laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Your wife comes with us. Insurance against future problems. The evidence gets examined. If it's complete and accurate, maybe she lives long enough to see Christmas. Matt had expected this betrayal. It was exactly what he would have done in Wolf's position. Take the evidence and keep the leverage. No deal, Matt said. We do this simultaneously or nobody gets anything. You're not in a position to negotiate, Shelton called out. We have 9 guns trained on you right now. And I have federal agents positioned around this facility, Matt replied, knowing it was a lie that would create exactly the reaction he needed. The response was immediate. Security team members began reporting movement in the shadows, imaginary federal agents that their paranoia conjured from every wind-blown piece of debris. Boss, we've got possible movement on the South Ridge, one of them radioed. North side clear, but thermal's picking up something weird. Matt smiled. His psychological manipulation was working perfectly. By suggesting federal presence, he'd activated the network's deepest fear and turned their own security protocols against them. How many agents? Wolf demanded. Enough, Matt replied. This was never about a trade. This was about bringing you into the open. It was then that Howard Wolf made his fatal mistake. Convinced he was about to be surrounded by federal agents, he decided to eliminate the immediate threat and fight his way out. Kill him, Wolf ordered. Take the briefcase and extract immediately. 4 security team members raised their weapons, aiming at Matt's position. But as they did, the facility's defensive systems activated. High-intensity floodlights blazed to life, temporarily blinding everyone in the open. The sound of gunfire erupted from multiple directions as Nate McKenna's team engaged the security personnel with precision sniper fire. But Matt's most devastating weapon was digital. As Wolf's men tried to coordinate their response using encrypted radios, Matt's malware turned their own communication devices against them. Their radios began broadcasting their positions to Matt's team while generating false reports of federal agents advancing from all directions. We're surrounded, someone screamed into the radio. Fall back to defensive positions. Where the hell are they coming from? In the chaos, Matt activated the briefcase's hidden payload. The explosion wasn't large, just enough to destroy the decoy evidence and create additional confusion. But the psychological effect was devastating. Howard Wolf, realizing he'd been outmaneuvered, grabbed Lindsay and pressed a gun to her head. Federal agents. I have a hostage. I want safe passage out of here. Matt stepped into the light, no longer pretending to be a desperate husband negotiating for his wife's safety. His voice was calm, cold, and utterly in control. There are no federal agents here, Howard. There's just me. That's impossible. The gunfire, private contractors, the communications interference, my malware, the surveillance, my equipment. You walked into a trap designed by someone who spent 15 years learning how to hunt people like you. For the first time, fear appeared in Howard Wolf's eyes. You're insane. I'm thorough. Lindsay, would you like to tell Howard about the evidence I've already provided to federal prosecutors? About the recordings I made of your conversations with Daniel? About the financial records that trace every transaction in your network? Lindsay's blindfolded face turned toward Matt's voice. Matt, please. Shut up. His voice cut through her pleading like a blade. You made your choice when you decided to traffic children, when you planned to murder our family to protect your operation, when you helped create a network that destroyed innocent lives for profit. Daniel Shelton, crouched behind the SUV, tried to organize a fighting retreat. But McKenna's team had positioned themselves with military precision. Every escape route was covered. "This is over," Matt announced. "Your network is finished. Your assets are seized. Your people are arrested. And now, you're all going to pay for what you've done." Howard Wolf pressed the gun harder against Lindsay's temple. "I'll kill her." "No," Matt said quietly. "You won't." He pressed a button on his phone, activating the final component of his trap. The abandoned mining equipment around the facility suddenly roared to life. Massive conveyors and crushing machines that hadn't operated in decades, now controlled by Matt's integrated systems. The sound was deafening, disorienting, and terrifying. But more importantly, it masked the movement of McKenna's team as they closed in for the final assault. What happened next took less than 60 seconds, but it ended a trafficking network that had operated with impunity for over a decade. When the gunfire stopped and the machinery fell silent, only Matt Anthony was left standing in the Nevada desert, surrounded by the bodies of people who had thought themselves untouchable. Lindsay lay motionless near the SUV, a victim of the violence she'd helped create. Daniel Shelton had died trying to reach his communication equipment. Howard Wolf's body was sprawled near the mining shaft where he'd made his final stand. Matt felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Only the cold certainty that his children were now safe from people who would have destroyed them without hesitation. As sirens approached in the distance, federal agents responding to automatically transmitted distress signals, Matt uploaded the final evidence package to secure servers around the world. Every client, every transaction, every detail of the trafficking network was now in the hands of law enforcement agencies across 3 countries. The federal case would proceed with or without the surviving defendants. The network was permanently destroyed, and the children who might have become future victims would never know how close they'd come to horror. Matt Anthony had spent his career protecting people from digital predators. Tonight, he completed that mission using methods that would never appear in any official report. Chapter 8, Aftermath. The federal crime scene team arrived at the mining facility at 3:17 a.m., expecting to process a hostage exchange gone wrong. What they found was something much more complex: the systematic elimination of a trafficking network's entire leadership structure, with evidence so comprehensive that it would reshape international law enforcement efforts. Detective Rosa Nixon was among the first investigators on scene. She found Matt Anthony sitting calmly in his car, hands visible on the steering wheel, waiting to be processed. His clothing was clean, his demeanor composed, and his story was simple. He'd arrived to negotiate for his wife's release and found himself caught in a firefight between network members and unknown assailants. "Unknown assailants?" Nixon asked during their preliminary interview. "I never saw them clearly," Matt replied. "The facility lighting was damaged early in the engagement. I took cover and waited for it to end." Ballistics evidence supported his account. Every fatal shot had been fired from sniper positions hundreds of yards away, using military-grade weapons that weren't registered to Matt or anyone in his immediate circle. The shooters had policed their brass and left no useful forensic evidence. The facility's security cameras had malfunctioned during the critical time frame, a convenient electrical failure that destroyed the digital storage systems just as the shooting began. "Mr. Anthony," Nixon said carefully, "you understand that multiple federal agencies are going to want to interview you about tonight's events. Of course, I want to cooperate fully with any investigation. And you understand that the deaths of 9 people, including your wife, are going to generate significant scrutiny." Matt met her eyes with the steady gaze of a man who'd calculated every possible outcome months in advance. "Detective, my wife was a willing participant in a trafficking network that destroyed children's lives. The people who died tonight were responsible for horrors that will take years to fully document. If someone took the law into their own hands to stop them," he paused, "that person probably saved more lives than we'll ever know. By dawn, The scope of the evidence began to emerge. Federal analysts worked through the night, processing the data Matt had provided, uncovering a trafficking network that spanned 4 countries and involved over 60 individuals in operational roles. The financial records alone revealed assets worth over $40 million, all of which could now be seized and used for victim compensation. The client databases contained names that would shock the public: politicians, business leaders, and public figures who had paid premium prices for access to trafficked children. More importantly, the network's communication logs provided intelligence that led to the rescue of 17 additional victims and the arrest of 12 network members who hadn't been present at the mining facility. By 10 a.m., Matt was released pending further investigation. Federal agencies had found no evidence connecting him to the deaths at the mining facility, and his cooperation in exposing the trafficking network made him a valuable witness rather than a suspect. He drove home to his empty house, where crime scene tape still marked the areas where evidence had been hidden. The kitchen renovation would never be completed. The house would be sold as part of the federal asset seizure, with proceeds going to victim compensation funds. At noon, Matt's phone rang. The caller ID showed Oliver's number. "Dad, we saw the news. Is Mom really?" Oliver's voice cracked. "Yes, son. She's gone. The news said she was involved with bad people." Matt closed his eyes, choosing his words carefully. "Your mother made some very poor choices, but that doesn't change the fact that she loved you and Anna very much. It was a lie, but one that his children needed to hear. They would learn the truth gradually, as they became old enough to understand the complexity of adult evil. For now, they needed to grieve their mother without the burden of knowing what she'd become. When are we coming home?" "You're not. We're starting over. New house, new city, new everything." Matt had already made arrangements with a client in Oregon who specialized in witness protection for corporate whistleblowers. Within a week, he and the children would disappear into new identities, protected by the same systems he developed to hide executives from corporate retaliation. The Anthony family would cease to exist, replaced by a family with no connection to trafficking networks or federal investigations. That afternoon, Matt met with Detective Nixon for a final debriefing. They sat in a secure conference room while federal prosecutors and analysts presented their findings. "The evidence you provided has given us the largest trafficking prosecution in U.S. history," the lead prosecutor announced. 47 defendants across 4 jurisdictions. Asset seizures totaling $63 million. An intelligence that's already disrupted 3 additional networks. "What about the children?" Matt asked. 17 victims recovered and receiving treatment. Another 23 identified through the network's records, with international cooperation to provide support services. Matt nodded. It was the outcome he'd worked toward, but the numbers couldn't capture the reality of lives destroyed and barely rescued. "There's one more thing," Detective Nixon said. "The investigation into the mining facility deaths. We found no evidence of your involvement, but you know I was involved. I know that 9 very dangerous people died in a way that prevented them from ever hurting anyone again. I know that without those deaths, the network's leadership would have disappeared and rebuilt their operation within 6 months. And I know that sometimes the justice system needs help from people who aren't constrained by legal limitations." Matt studied her face. "Are you asking me to confess to something?" "I'm telling you that as far as federal law enforcement is concerned, you're a hero who risked his life to expose a trafficking network and save children. What happened at that mining facility was an internal war between criminals that eliminated a major threat to public safety. And unofficially, I hope whoever was responsible sleeps well at night, because they did what needed to be done." 3 days later, Matt Anthony closed the accounts of his cybersecurity company and transferred all assets to a victim support foundation. He donated his house to federal authorities for asset seizure and said goodbye to a life he'd spent 15 years building. On Thursday morning, he picked up Oliver and Anna from their aunt's house in California. They drove north toward Oregon and their new life, while behind them, federal prosecutors began the largest trafficking trial in American history. The children asked few questions during the long drive. They were too young to fully understand what their mother had done, but old enough to sense that their old life was gone forever. "Dad," Anna asked as they crossed the Oregon border, "are we going to be okay?" Matt looked at his children in the rearview mirror, innocent faces that would never be threatened by the monsters who had used their home as part of a trafficking network. "We're going to be better than okay," he promised. "We're going to be safe." And for the first time in months, Matt Anthony allowed himself to believe that was true. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Michael Sullivan, formerly Matt Anthony, stood in the kitchen of a modest farmhouse outside Portland, Oregon, watching his children adapt to their new lives with the resilience that had always amazed him. Oliver, now 13, had joined the local soccer team and discovered a talent for computer programming that reminded Matt of his own younger years. Anna had found her place in the school's art program, creating paintings that were bright and hopeful, a stark contrast to the darkness they'd left behind. The federal trial had concluded 3 weeks earlier with guilty verdicts for all 47 defendants. The judge had handed down sentences ranging from 25 years to life without parole. Asset seizures had generated over $80 million for victim compensation, and international cooperation had dismantled trafficking networks in 7 countries. But Michael, rarely followed the news coverage. That chapter of his life was closed, sealed behind layers of legal protection and witness security protocols that made his new identity unbreachable. His new cybersecurity consulting firm specialized in protecting children's advocacy groups and victim support organizations. The work paid modestly compared to his previous corporate clients, but it provided something more valuable: the certainty that his skills were being used to protect rather than merely profit. On a Tuesday morning in spring, Michael received a secure message from Detective Nixon, one of only 3 people who knew his new location. The message contained a single photograph: a young girl, maybe 14, smiling at the camera from what appeared to be a group therapy session. The accompanying text read, "One of the rescued victims from your case. She's been adopted by a loving family and is doing well in school. Thought you'd want to know that the work was worth it." Michael studied the photograph for a long moment, then deleted the message according to security protocols. But he printed the photo and placed it in a secure file with 16 others. Images of children whose lives had been saved by the destruction of the trafficking network. They were his real victory, not the prosecutions or asset seizures or headlines about justice being served. Every smile in those photographs represented a life that would unfold naturally, free from the horror that Lindsay and her partners had planned to inflict. That afternoon, Anna burst through the front door with excitement that had become routine since their move to Oregon. "Dad, look what Mrs. Patterson said about my painting." She held up a drawing of their farmhouse, surrounded by fields and mountains, with 2 children and a man standing in front of it. The family was small but complete. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. She said I should enter it in the state competition. Will you help me with the application?" "Of course." As Anna ran upstairs to change clothes, Oliver appeared in the kitchen doorway. At 13, he was beginning to ask more sophisticated questions about their relocation and their mother's death. "Dad, I've been thinking about what happened to Mom." Michael set down his coffee and gave his son his full attention. "What about it?" "The news said she was involved with people who hurt kids. But she never hurt us." "No, she didn't." "Do you think she was trying to protect us from those people? Like, maybe she was involved because she didn't have a choice." Michael considered his response carefully. Oliver needed to process their mother's choices in a way that wouldn't destroy his ability to trust other people. The full truth, that Lindsay had been a willing architect of horror, would come later when Oliver was mature enough to handle it. "I think your mother made some very bad decisions that she thought would protect our family. Sometimes people convince themselves that doing wrong things for right reasons makes those things acceptable. But it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Wrong is wrong, regardless of the justification." Oliver nodded thoughtfully. "Is that why we moved here? To get away from all that wrongness. We moved here to start fresh, to build a life based on doing the right things for the right reasons." That evening, after the children were asleep, Michael sat on his front porch, looking out over farmland that stretched to the horizon. The stars were brighter here than they'd been in the suburbs, and the silence was complete except for natural sounds. His secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. For a moment, Michael tensed. The message could represent a new threat, someone from the old network seeking revenge. But when he opened it, he found something unexpected. "Mr. Sullivan, my name is Gene Potts. I represent a group of parents whose children were rescued from trafficking operations last year. We would like to express our gratitude for the work you did to expose the network. We know you prefer privacy, but we wanted you to know that 17 families sleep better at night because of your courage." Attached to the message were 17 photographs, children in their new lives, safe homes, with families who would protect them. The images showed birthday parties, school graduations, sports teams, art projects, all the normal childhood experiences that would have been stolen from them. Michael looked at each photograph carefully, memorizing faces that represented the true measure of success. Then he deleted the message and added the photos to his secure file. The next morning, Anna asked if they could plant a garden behind the house. "What kind of garden?" Michael asked. "Flowers. Lots of different colors. I want to paint them when they bloom." "We can do that." As they worked in the soil that afternoon, turning the earth and planning where each flower would grow, Michael realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not the destruction of enemies or the satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet creation of something beautiful and innocent. Oliver joined them after school, bringing seeds he'd selected for vegetables that could grow alongside Anna's flowers. As the three of them worked together in the spring sunshine, Michael understood that they had successfully escaped the darkness that had consumed their old life. The trafficking network was gone forever. The children who had been rescued were healing in safe homes. The federal justice system had processed the legal consequences of the crimes. And Michael Sullivan was building a new life focused on protection rather than revenge, creation rather than destruction. That evening, as he tucked Anna into bed, she asked the question that had been coming for months. "Dad, do you miss Mom?" Michael considered his answer carefully. "I miss the person I thought she was. I miss the family I thought we had. But I don't miss the person she actually became." "Do you think she loved us?" "I think she loved the idea of us. But love isn't just a feeling, Anna. Love is what you do to protect the people you care about. And your mother's actions showed that she was more concerned with protecting herself than protecting her family." Anna absorbed this with the seriousness that had developed since their move. "But you protected us, and I always will." As he turned off the lights and closed her door, Michael realized that Anna had identified the fundamental difference between himself and Lindsay. When faced with moral choices, Lindsay had consistently chosen self-preservation over protection of the innocent. Michael had chosen differently. 6 months after the destruction of the trafficking network, the world was measurably safer for children. Federal agencies had used the intelligence to disrupt related operations across 3 continents. Victim support organizations had received unprecedented funding, and 17 families had been reunited with children they thought they'd lost forever. But for Michael Sullivan, the real victory was much simpler. Oliver and Anna Sullivan were growing up in a safe home, building innocent lives, surrounded by people who would protect them from the monsters that existed in the world. On a clear spring evening in Oregon, as his children slept safely in their beds, Michael Anthony's mission was finally complete. The network was destroyed. The children were safe. Justice had been served. And a new family was growing, something beautiful in the soil where darkness had once taken root. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Family Facade. Corey Nixon had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years as a private investigator had honed his instincts to a razor's edge, teaching him that the most dangerous lies came wrapped in the most beautiful truths. but standing in his marble-floored kitchen that Friday evening, watching his wife Jeanette Harrell Nixon prepare dinner, while their 12-year-old daughter Myra bounced excitedly about her first high school party invitation, he felt only the warm contentment of a man who believed he'd built something unshakable. "Dad, can you believe Kelly Hopper invited me? She's like the coolest 8th grader ever." Myra's auburn hair caught the light as she spun around, her excitement infectious. Corey ruffled her hair, his weathered hands gentle despite their size. "Just remember what we talked about, sweetheart. Smart choices, and call if you need anything." Jeanette looked up from the stove, her blonde hair perfectly styled even after a full day at her real estate office. "Corey, she'll be fine. It's just a pool party at the Hopper house. Agnes Cervantes will be their chaperoning." She smiled that radiant smile that had captured his heart 15 years ago. "You worry too much." The evening felt like countless others in their Westfield home. Corey had built this life methodically. The successful PI business, the house in the best neighborhood, the family that was the envy of their social circle. After a childhood of foster homes and military service that had shown him the worst of humanity, he'd created his sanctuary. At 42, Corey's imposing 6-foot frame and steel gray eyes still commanded respect. His reputation in the investigation business was built on 2 principles: absolute loyalty to those who earned it, and absolute destruction for those who betrayed it. His wife and daughter were his world, the only people who'd ever seen the gentleman beneath the predator. "I've got that background check to finish up tonight," Corey said, kissing Jeanette's forehead. "The Hoffman divorce case should be wrapped up by the time you get back from dropping Myra off." "Actually," Jeanette said, not meeting his eyes, "Mom's picking her up. She wanted to spend some time with Myra before the party." Corey nodded, though something nagged at him. Donna Tyler, his mother-in-law, had been increasingly present lately, always with reasons that sounded perfectly reasonable. Still, family was family, and he'd learned to pick his battles. The call came at 11:47 p.m. "Mr. Nixon, this is Dr. Francis Calhoun at Westfield General. Your daughter was brought in from a party. You need to come immediately." The 20-minute drive felt like hours. Corey's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Myra was responsible, careful. What could have happened? The hospital's fluorescent lights felt harsh and accusing as he strode through the automatic doors. The desk nurse directed him to the 3rd floor, where he found Dr. Calhoun waiting with 2 police officers. "Mr. Nixon," the doctor began, his face grave. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but—" "Wait." Detective Leonard Hood stepped forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Nixon, before you see your daughter, I need to warn you. What happened tonight? You must not see her. Not yet. We need to prepare you for what you're going to find." Corey's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about? What happened to my daughter?" Dr. Calhoun's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sorry, but we couldn't prevent what happened to her. The trauma was too severe by the time she arrived." The words hit Corey like physical blows. His vision tunneled, and he had to grip the wall to keep from falling. His little girl, his Myra. 15 minutes later, as he sat in the waiting room with his head in his hands, he heard something that stopped his heart. Laughter. Not just any laughter. Jeanette's distinctive musical laugh. The one she saved for truly joyful moments. He looked up to see his wife and mother-in-law emerging from the hallway that led to the patient rooms. They were smiling, talking in low, animated voices. Donna Tyler even looked relieved. "Jeanette," Corey's voice cracked. How can you be laughing?" "Our daughter." Jeanette's face immediately transformed into a mask of grief, but not before Corey caught something in her eyes. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Oh, honey," she said, rushing to his side. "I'm sorry. Mom was just telling me about something to distract me from the pain. You know how I get when I'm overwhelmed." But Corey's trained eye caught everything. The way Donna Tyler quickly looked away, the slight delay in Jeanette's emotional shift, the fact that neither woman's makeup was disturbed by tears. "Can I see her now?" he asked. "The doctors are still working," Jeanette said quickly. "They said it might be a while. Maybe we should go home and wait for them to call." That night, Corey didn't sleep. He lay in bed next to his wife, listening to her breathing analyzing every interaction from the evening. Something was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. By dawn, he'd made a decision. If someone was playing games with his family, they were about to learn why Corey Nixon had never lost a case, and why his enemies had a habit of disappearing from his life permanently. Chapter 2. Unraveling the Web. The next morning, Corey arrived at Westfield General at 6 a.m., 2 hours before visiting hours began. His years of cultivating contacts had taught him that hospital security guards were often former cops looking for easier work, and that they appreciated a fellow professional who spoke their language. Terrible thing about the Nixon girl, security guard Dale Hodges said, accepting the coffee Corey had brought. Though, I gotta say, strangest reaction I've ever seen from family members. Corey kept his expression neutral. How do you mean? Well, usually when kids come in from accidents, the parents are beside themselves. Your wife and her mother, though, they seemed more like they were celebrating something. Even asked about discharge paperwork before they'd even seen the girl. The first crack in the facade. Corey filed it away and continued his investigation. Dr. Francis Calhoun was more forthcoming than expected when Corey cornered him during his morning rounds. Your daughter wasn't in the condition we initially reported, he admitted reluctantly. There was some confusion in the communication. She had some scrapes and bruises, possibly from a fall, but nothing life-threatening. The police involvement was requested by your wife. Something about suspected foul play that never materialized. The second crack. By noon, Corey had spoken to 6 hospital staff members, 3 police officers, and 2 paramedics. The picture emerging made his blood run cold. Myra had indeed been brought to the hospital, but not as the victim of some terrible accident. She'd been brought in by Agnes Cervantes, who'd found her locked in a storage shed behind the Hopper house, crying and claiming her mother had told her to hide there and not come out no matter what. The paramedics had found minor injuries consistent with deliberately inflicted bruises. Someone had hurt his daughter on purpose. The police had been called not by the hospital, but by Jeanette herself, who'd arrived before Corey and had specifically requested that he be told Myra was gravely injured and that he shouldn't see her. Corey sat in his car outside the hospital, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Someone had deliberately hurt his daughter and manipulated him into believing she was dying. Someone who had access to their family schedule, who knew he would respond exactly as he had. Someone close enough to orchestrate this entire scenario. His phone buzzed with a text from Jeanette. Myra's doing better. Doctors say she can come home tomorrow. You're such a good father. She's lucky to have you. The emotional manipulation was textbook, designed to make him grateful rather than suspicious. But Corey had spent too many years seeing through lies to fall for it now. He drove to his office and pulled up the surveillance system he'd had installed around their house 6 months earlier. Officially, it was for security. Unofficially, Corey Nixon trusted no one completely, a habit that was about to save his life. The footage from the past 3 weeks revealed a pattern that made his stomach churn. Jeanette meeting with a man Corey didn't recognize at coffee shops across town. Donna Tyler making frequent visits when Corey was out of town on cases. Most damning of all, a clear shot of Jeanette and the unknown man kissing passionately in Corey's own driveway while he'd been in Chicago on a missing persons case. But it was the timestamp on the final video that sealed his wife's fate. Yesterday afternoon, 3 hours before Myra's party, showing Jeanette and a stranger entering the house with Myra, then leaving 20 minutes later without her. Myra never made it to any party. Corey recognized the look in the man's eyes from the surveillance footage. He'd seen it in war zones and crime scenes, the cold satisfaction of someone who enjoyed inflicting pain. This wasn't just about adultery. This was about something much darker. He ran the stranger's license plate through his contacts at the DMV. The name that came back made his blood run cold. Joel Walsh, recently released from a 7-year stint in federal prison for charges involving exploitation of minors. Corey closed his laptop and walked to his office safe. Inside, among the usual documents and emergency cache, was a .45 caliber pistol he'd hoped never to use again. Next to it was a small black notebook containing contact information from men who, like him, had learned in the military that some problems required permanent solutions. He thought about Myra, probably confused and traumatized, wondering why her father hadn't come to save her immediately. He thought about the years of marriage to a woman who could orchestrate her own daughter's abuse for whatever sick game she was playing. Most of all, he thought about the promise he'd made to himself long ago. Anyone who betrayed his trust didn't get a second chance. They didn't get to explain, apologize, or make amends. They simply ceased to exist. But first, he needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Jeanette and Joel Walsh had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed they were dealing with a naive husband who would never see through their manipulation. They were about to learn that Corey Nixon had never been naive about anything. Chapter 3. The Depth of Betrayal. Corey spent the next 48 hours constructing a web of surveillance that would have impressed federal agents. Using equipment from his PI business and contacts from his military days, he turned his own home into a monitoring station while maintaining the facade of a worried father waiting for his daughter's recovery. Myra came home Tuesday evening, quiet and withdrawn, but physically unharmed. Corey held her close, noting the way she flinched when Jeanette approached and how she kept looking at the doors as if planning escape routes. His daughter was traumatized, but alive, and she was the key to understanding what had really happened. That night, after Jeanette had gone to bed, early claiming exhaustion, Corey sat with Myra in her room. "Sweetheart, I need you to tell me exactly what happened at the party. All of it." Myra's eyes filled with tears. "There wasn't really a party, Dad. Mom drove me to this house, and there was this man there. He was scary, and he kept asking me questions about you, about your work, your clients, where you keep your files." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about a simple affair. This was about Corey's business, his cases, his clients, many of whom were wealthy individuals going through messy divorces with secrets worth killing for. "What kind of questions, baby?" "He wanted to know about the papers in your office, especially anything about Mr. Randall Steele. Mom told him you've been working on something big, something that could make us rich." Myra wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "When I said I didn't know anything, he got angry. Mom told him to put me in the shed until you came looking for me, and then they would... What would they do, Myra?" "They said they would hurt you, Dad. Really hurt you. And then the man would take over your business, and Mom would get all the money from your clients." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom said you were stupid and that she never loved you anyway." Corey's vision went red for a moment, but he forced himself to stay calm for his daughter's sake. The plan was becoming clear. Stage a crisis with Myra to get Corey emotional and off balance. Then use his distracted state to either kill him or frame him for something that would destroy his business and reputation. Meanwhile, Jeanette would play the grieving widow and inherit everything he'd built. The Randall Steele case was worth $50 million in assets. Corey had uncovered evidence that Steele's wife was hiding money in offshore accounts, information that could swing the divorce settlement dramatically. If someone could get access to that evidence and sell it to the highest bidder. "Myra, I need you to do something for me, and it's very important. Can you be brave?" She nodded, though her lower lip trembled. "I'm going to send you to stay with Uncle Bruce for a few days. You remember him from the barbecues? He's going to keep you safe while I take care of some business. But you can't tell Mom where you're going, and you can't tell her we talked about any of this. Can you do that?" Bruce Eastman wasn't actually Corey's brother, but they'd served together in Afghanistan and had maintained the kind of bond that transcended blood. More importantly, Bruce specialized in personal security and wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who threatened someone under his protection. The next morning, Corey implemented the first phase of his counterplan. While Jeanette was at her real estate office, he transferred Myra to Bruce's secure compound upstate, telling his wife that their daughter was staying with his fictional sister for psychological counseling after her trauma. Jeanette's reaction told him everything. Instead of insisting on knowing which therapist or demanding to speak with his sister she'd never heard of, she simply nodded and said she thought it was probably for the best. That afternoon, Corey received a text from an unknown number. "Your daughter's safe, but not for long. We have what we need from your office. Time to retire, old man." They made their move too early. While they thought Myra was still within their reach, she was actually 200 miles away with a man who'd killed Taliban fighters with his bare hands. While they thought they'd gained access to his office, They'd actually accessed a decoy system Corey had set up years ago for exactly this scenario. But most importantly, they'd revealed that there were more people involved than just Jeanette and Joel Walsh. Corey opened his laptop and began typing a message to 5 very specific contacts from his military days. Men who, like him, had been permanently changed by war and had found civilian life lacking in meaningful purpose. Men who would relish the opportunity to apply their unique skills to a personal matter for their old commander. By sunset, Herbert Lloyd was positioned across the street from Joel Walsh's apartment with a sniper rifle. Francisco Huber was monitoring Donna Tyler's house with recording equipment that could pick up conversations through walls. Vernon Lord had taken a job as a maintenance worker at Jeanette's real estate office, giving him access to her computer and phone records. And Corey himself was preparing for the final phase of a plan that would ensure none of his betrayers lived to enjoy their victory. He thought about the man he'd been before war, had stripped away his illusions about human nature. That man might have tried to reason with his wife, might have sought therapy or mediation or legal remedies. But that man had died in an Afghan cave when his own commanding officer had tried to sell him and his team to insurgents for drug money. The man who'd emerged from that betrayal understood that some people were simply predators who would never stop hunting until they were permanently stopped. Jeanette Harrell Nixon, Joel Walsh, and anyone else involved in this conspiracy had made the same mistake as his former CEO. They'd assumed Corey's loyalty made him weak, that his love for his family made him vulnerable. Tomorrow, they would learn that a predator's greatest strength was the ability to make his enemies believe he was prey. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Past. 20 years ago, Staff Sergeant Corey Nixon had learned the most important lesson of his life while bleeding out in a Taliban cave, listening to his commanding officer negotiate the sale of his team's location for 2 kilograms of heroin. The betrayal hadn't just cost him 3 of his closest friends. It had taught him that the capacity for evil existed in everyone, hidden behind masks of love, loyalty, and friendship. When he'd finally escaped and systematically eliminated every person involved in that betrayal, from the CEO to the Afghan middleman to the stateside dealer who'd facilitated the transaction, he'd made himself a promise. Never again would he be the victim. Now, sitting in his office at 3 a.m. while his wife slept peacefully in their bed, Corey allowed himself to remember the skills that had kept him alive when the world went dark. The Army had trained him to be efficient, but Afghanistan had made him ruthless. The difference between a soldier and a predator wasn't about rules of engagement. It was about accepting that some threats required permanent solutions. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Herbert Lloyd. Package acquired. Walsh meeting unknown female, apartment 4B. Recommend immediate escalation. Corey pulled up the surveillance feed. Herbert was streaming from his position. The unknown female was a brunette in her 30s, someone Corey didn't recognize, but whose body language suggested familiarity with violence. She moved like a professional, military or law enforcement background, possibly private security. Another player in the game. The conspiracy was larger than he'd initially calculated. A second message arrived from Francisco Huber, mother-in-law hosting strategy session. 3 additional males present. Heavy hardware visible. This is bigger than family drama, boss. Corey felt the familiar calm that had once made him legendary among special operations units. The more complex the threat, the more methodical his response became. Emotion was a luxury for people who fought fair battles. Corey had learned long ago that survival required embracing the darkness that civilized people pretended didn't exist. He opened his secure laptop and began accessing resources he'd hoped never to use again. Swiss bank accounts containing funds from his government work that had never been officially reported. Contact lists of mercenaries, weapons dealers, and information brokers who operated in the spaces between legal and illegal. Most importantly, the detailed psychological profiles he'd compiled on everyone in his life over the past 15 years, including his wife. Jeanette's profile made for disturbing reading. A woman with narcissistic tendencies who'd been attracted to his military record not for the heroism, but for the danger it represented. Someone who collected secrets and had an unusual fascination with true crime documentaries featuring manipulative women. Most tellingly, someone who'd asked far too many specific questions about his military service and his current clients over the years. He dismissed it as curiosity. Now he realized she'd been building a database for exactly this kind of operation. The psychological assessment he'd done on Donna Tyler was equally revealing. A woman with gambling debts and a history of questionable financial decisions who'd been unusually interested in Corey's business success. Someone who'd repeatedly suggested that Jeanette deserved better and who'd made subtle comments about the dangerous nature of Corey's work. Both women had been preparing for this betrayal for years, possibly from the beginning of his marriage. At 4 a.m., Corey received a call from an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, then listened to a recording that confirmed his worst suspicions. "Nixon, this is your last warning. We have your daughter, we have your files, and we have enough evidence to destroy your reputation permanently. Transfer $5 million to the account number we'll send you. Disappear quietly, and maybe your family lives through this. Refuse, and we start sending pieces of the little girl to your office." They were amateurs. Real professionals never made threats. They simply acted. The fact that they were trying to negotiate told Corey they were overconfident and underprepared for the level of response they triggered. He called Bruce Eastman's secure line. Status report. Package is secure and asking for her daddy. She's scared but unharmed. Want me to put her on the line? Negative. Maintain security protocols. I'll be wrapping this up within 72 hours. Roger that. And Corey? The little one mentioned something about Mom bringing strange men to the house even before this Joel character. Might want to check your surveillance archives. After hanging up, Corey spent the next hour reviewing months of surveillance footage he'd previously skimmed. The pattern was clear. Jeanette had been hosting meetings with various men for over 6 months, always when Corey was out of town. Some faces he recognized from wanted posters in his files. Contract killers, information brokers, and thieves who specialized in high-value targets. His wife had been planning this betrayal for months, possibly years. She'd been using their home as a headquarters for a criminal enterprise that targeted wealthy divorce clients and their investigators. The depth of the betrayal was actually liberating. It meant Corey could respond without moral complexity or emotional conflict. These weren't misguided family members who'd made poor choices. They were career criminals who'd made the fatal mistake of targeting someone with the skills and resources to fight back. By dawn, Corey had assembled a complete picture of the conspiracy and the personnel he'd need to eliminate it. Joel Walsh was the muscle and the connection to organized crime. Donna Tyler was the inside information source and the financial coordinator. The unknown brunette was likely the operational planner, someone with tactical experience who designed the kidnapping and extortion scheme. And Jeanette was the mastermind, the spider at the center of a web that had been years in the making. Corey opened his weapons safe and began selecting equipment for what would be his final family reunion. The .45 pistol was reliable but limited. The tactical knife was silent but required close proximity. The explosives were thorough but indiscriminate. For this job, he needed something that would send a message to anyone else who might consider targeting his family. Precision, efficiency, and absolute finality. He selected 3 items that would serve his purposes perfectly: a combat shotgun for close-quarters work, a suppressed rifle for distance elimination, and a small device that would ensure none of his targets ever hurt another family. 20 years ago, he'd learned that betrayal was the one crime that required the death penalty. Tomorrow, he would teach that lesson to his wife and her accomplices. The hunter was done pretending to be prey. Chapter 5. Setting the Trap. Wednesday morning, Corey Nixon began the performance of his life. He called his wife at her office, his voice carefully crafted to sound defeated and panicked. "Jeanette," they called again. "They want $5 million by Friday or... God, I can't even say it. They have pictures of Myra, and they're threatening too." He let his voice break convincingly. "Oh, honey." Jeanette's voice was perfectly pitched between concern and satisfaction. "Maybe we should just pay them. Your business is worth more than that, right? We could liquidate some assets, use the emergency accounts. I don't have that kind of liquid cash. The business is worth it, but everything's tied up in investments and client trust accounts. I'd have to..." Corey paused. as if the idea was just occurring to him. I'd have to access the Steelcase files. There's information there worth 10 times what they're asking. The silence on the other end told him everything. Jeanette was probably signaling to someone, confirming that their plan was working. "If that's what it takes to save our daughter," she said finally, "do whatever you have to do." After hanging up, Corey spent the morning constructing an elaborate deception. He created false financial documents showing massive debts and liquidity problems. He prepared dummy files for the Steelcase that contained enough real information to seem authentic, but nothing that would actually harm his client. Most importantly, he set up a meeting location that would serve as the perfect killing ground. The abandoned Riverside warehouse on the outskirts of town had been the site of one of his first cases as a private investigator. A missing persons job that had ended with him discovering a human trafficking ring. The building had been condemned afterward, but Corey had maintained access through a contact in the city planning office. More importantly, he'd spent 3 years using it as a training facility, memorizing every sightline, every hiding spot, every tactical advantage it offered. At 2 p.m., he called the number the kidnappers had provided. "I have what you want. Riverside Warehouse, Building C, tonight at midnight. Come alone, or I burn everything and disappear." Joel Walsh's voice was cocky and confident. "You're not in a position to make demands, old man. We'll come with enough firepower to level that building if we have to. Bring an army if it makes you feel safer. Just remember, if anything happens to me, the real Steel files get delivered to the FBI automatically. Your choice." After hanging up, Corey spent the afternoon turning the warehouse into a tactical maze. Herbert Lloyd positioned himself in the water tower half a mile away with a Barrett .50 caliber rifle and night vision scope. Francisco Huber set up motion sensors and remote cameras throughout the building complex. Vernon Lord planted listening devices and small explosive charges at strategic locations. But Corey's most important preparation was psychological. He called Jeanette one final time, his voice breaking with manufactured despair. They agreed to the exchange. "I'm meeting them tonight with everything, the files, the account information, everything we've built together. If this goes wrong—" "It won't go wrong," Jeanette interrupted, dropping her act for just a moment. "Just do what they say and come home safe." The slip confirmed what Corey had suspected. Jeanette knew exactly how the evening would unfold because she'd helped plan it. At 11 p.m., Corey arrived at the warehouse, carrying a briefcase that appeared to contain documents and a laptop. In reality, it held a small arsenal and enough plastic explosive to bring down the entire building if necessary. The first sign that his enemies had underestimated him came when Herbert's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Boss, we've got 12 hostiles approaching from 3 directions. Military formation, automatic weapons, night vision gear. These aren't street thugs. Copy that. Positions: 2 teams of 4 flanking east and west. 1 team of 4 coming through the main entrance. Unknown female in tactical gear leading the western team." Corey smiled in the darkness. They'd brought enough firepower to eliminate a small army, which meant they'd never intended for him to survive the exchange. They wanted the files, the money, and the insurance payout from his death. Vernon, Francisco, Initiate Phase 1. The warehouse suddenly blazed with floodlights that had been connected to a backup generator. The attacking teams immediately went defensive, seeking cover and regrouping. But in the few seconds they'd been blinded and disoriented, Corey had disappeared into the building's interior. His voice echoed through speakers he'd positioned throughout the complex. "Joel Walsh, Federal Prison Number 47,821-198. Served 7 years for trafficking minors across state lines. Donna Tyler, current gambling debt approximately $300,000 to organizations that don't accept late payments. Jeanette Harrell Nixon, maiden name Jeanette Harrell, no known previous marriages despite claiming her first husband died in Iraq." The suite door was unlocked, Jeanette's first mistake of the morning. She was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, still wearing the black dress she'd chosen for her widow's performance. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who believed she'd won. "Hello, Jeanette." She spun around, her face cycling through shock, confusion, and fear before settling on a mask of relief, so convincing it would have fooled anyone who didn't know her true nature. "Corey, thank God you're safe. I was so worried when you didn't come home. What happened? Did they hurt our baby?" "Our baby is fine. She's somewhere you'll never find her, being protected by people who actually care about her welfare." Something in his tone made Jeanette step backward. "What do you mean? Where is she?" "Corey, you're scaring me." "Am I?" Corey moved into the suite's living area, noting the packed suitcases by the door and the forged passport on the coffee table. "You seem to have been preparing for a trip. Going somewhere. I thought if those people came looking for us, we might need to disappear for a while. Just until this whole thing blows over." Corey picked up the passport, which bore Jeanette's photo but the name Rebecca Walsh, Joel's sister, according to the family information he'd extracted from Catherine Norton. Interesting choice of alias. Though I suppose it makes sense, considering you've been planning this with Joel for months. Jeanette's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "How much do you know?" "Everything. I know about the meetings in our house while I was out of town. I know about the surveillance you've been conducting on my clients. I know about the insurance policy you took out on me 3 months ago. I know you deliberately put our daughter in danger to manipulate me into a vulnerable position. She was never in real danger. She was traumatized and brutalized by your associates. That makes it real danger, regardless of your intentions." Jeanette moved toward the window, perhaps calculating whether the balcony offered an escape route. "You don't understand. This wasn't personal. This was business. You have access to information worth millions of dollars, and you were too naive to monetize it properly. So you decided to kill me and take it. I decided to set us up for life. The divorce business is lucrative, Corey. Wealthy people will pay enormous sums to get leverage over their spouses. Your client files are worth more than your little detective agency could earn in decades." Corey felt the familiar calm that preceded violence. "And our marriage? Our family? Was any of it real?" Jeanette laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "You were a means to an end from the beginning. A damaged military veteran with useful skills and no family connections to complicate things. Perfect for what I needed. What you needed was a victim. What you got was a predator who was better at this game than you are. Where are Joel and the others?" "Dead. All of them. I spent the night eliminating every person involved in the conspiracy against my family." Jeanette's face went pale. "You're lying. Joel was a professional. Catherine Norton was ex-military intelligence. They had backup plans. They underestimated their target. Just like you did." Corey drew the suppressed pistol in one fluid motion, holding it steady as Jeanette backed against the window. "You can't kill me, Corey. I'm your wife. You love me. I love the person I thought you were. That person never existed. What you are is a predator who used my daughter as bait to set up my murder. What you are is a cancer that I'm about to cut out of my family's life permanently." "Wait." Jeanette's voice was desperate now. "The money. There's $8 million in accounts Joel set up. Untraceable funds from previous jobs. I can give you the access codes. We can disappear together, start over somewhere else. I don't want her blood money. I want you dead. Think about Myra. She needs her mother. You can't make her an orphan over this." The mention of his daughter made Corey's finger tighten on the trigger. Myra needs protection from predators who would use her as a weapon. That includes her mother. I gave birth to her. I raised her. You can't just. You tortured her to manipulate me. You were willing to let strange men hurt her to further your scheme. You stopped being her mother the moment you chose money over her safety. Jeanette made a desperate lunge for her purse, which likely contained a weapon of her own. Corey's first shot took her in the shoulder, spinning her around and slamming her against the window. The second shot was center mass, dropping her to the floor. As she lay dying, Jeanette looked up at him with eyes full of hatred rather than remorse. You think you've won? There are others, people who know about your clients. This isn't over." "Yes, it is." The final shot was a mercy she didn't deserve, but that Corey gave her anyway. He spent the next hour eliminating all evidence of his presence in the suite. The hotel's security cameras had been disabled by Vernon Lord the previous evening. The key card Jeanette had used was registered to one of her aliases. The forensic evidence would suggest a falling out among criminals rather than a domestic homicide. By the time Corey left the Riverside Hotel, Jeanette Harrell Nixon had become just another casualty in what the media would later describe as a turf war between organized crime groups. Her mother, Donna Tyler, would be found dead in her home that afternoon, the victim of an apparent heart attack brought on by stress. The conspiracy against the Nixon family had been permanently resolved with the kind of efficiency that left no loose ends and no surviving threats. Corey drove toward Bruce Eastman's compound to collect his daughter, his mind already focused on the future rather than the past. Myra would need therapy to deal with her trauma, but she would recover surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her welfare. The predators who tried to destroy his family were dead. The threats had been neutralized. The hunter had protected his territory and eliminated every challenge to his pack. For the first time in weeks, Corey Nixon felt at peace. Chapter 8. Cleaning House. 3 days after Jeanette's death, Corey Nixon sat across from Detective Leonard Hood in the Westfield Police Department's interview room. The conversation was a formality. Hood had been one of Corey's contacts in law enforcement for years, and both men understood the game being played. "Terrible thing about your wife," Hood said, sliding a coffee across the table. "Hotel security footage shows her meeting with known criminals in the days before her death. Looks like she got involved with some dangerous people." "I had no idea," Corey replied, his grief perfectly performed. "Jeanette had been acting strangely lately, but I thought it was stress from work. If I'd known she was in danger. These organized crime types don't leave witnesses. The whole crew got eliminated. Joel Walsh, Catherine Norton, even your mother-in-law. Professional job, probably a rival gang, cleaning house." Corey nodded sadly. "At least Myra wasn't here to see any of this. I sent her to stay with family upstate when I realized something was wrong." The last piece of information he discovered just hours earlier. His wife had never been married before, which meant her tragic backstory about losing her first love to war had been complete fabrication designed to manipulate his protective instincts. "Unknown female operator," Corey continued. "Facial recognition identifies you as Catherine Norton, former Army intelligence officer dishonorably discharged for selling classified information. Current warrant outstanding in Virginia for murder of a federal judge." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "You came here expecting to rob and murder a naive civilian. Instead, you've walked into a prepared battlefield against someone who's killed more enemy combatants than all of you combined." Joel Walsh's voice came through a bullhorn. "We have her daughter, Nixon. Surrender now, or—" "No, you don't." Corey's voice was calm and certain. "My daughter is 200 miles away with a man who's killed Taliban commanders with his bare hands. What you have is a half-baked plan and about 30 seconds before I start reducing your numbers." The first explosive charge detonated near the Eastern team's position. Vernon had placed it perfectly, close enough to disorient and injure, but not close enough to kill immediately. Corey wanted them alive for the next phase of his plan. As the smoke cleared and the remaining attackers regrouped, Corey's voice echoed through the darkness one final time. "You made one crucial mistake. You assumed that someone who loved his family was weak. You're about to learn that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous predator on Earth." The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Predator Revealed. The first kill came at 12:17 a.m., when Francisco Huber's expertise with explosives eliminated 2 of the Eastern Assault team members who'd taken cover behind what they'd assumed was a solid concrete barrier. The shaped charge he'd planted there earlier turned their shelter into shrapnel that painted the warehouse floor. Catherine Norton's voice crackled over their communication system. "Abort and regroup. This is a trap." But Corey had anticipated their retreat routes. As the surviving team members fell back toward their vehicles, they found their path blocked by Herbert Lloyd's precision shooting from the water tower. The .50 caliber rounds didn't just stop their advance. They eliminated cover and concealment with devastating efficiency. "You can run," Corey's voice echoed through the darkness, "but you can't escape. And you can't call for backup because Vernon's been jamming your communications for the past hour." Joel Walsh broke cover, firing wildly into the warehouse interior. "Come out and fight like a man, you coward." Corey materialized from the shadows like a nightmare given form. His combat shotgun spoke once, and Walsh's left kneecap disintegrated. The man collapsed, screaming, but very much alive. Fighting like a man would imply you deserve that level of respect. Corey's voice was conversational as he approached the wounded kidnapper. But you torture children for money. That makes you something less than human. The second shot removed Walsh's right elbow. The third shattered his left ankle. "Where's my wife?" Through his agony, Walsh gasped out an address. Riverside Hotel, penthouse suite. She's waiting for confirmation. Confirmation of what? Your death, insurance, $2 million policy. Corey nodded and put the final shot through Walsh's forehead. He learned in Afghanistan that mercy was a luxury that got good people killed. The remaining attackers lasted another 15 minutes. Catherine Norton proved to be professionally competent, but ultimately outmatched by Corey's preparation and his team's superior positioning. When the warehouse finally fell silent, 6 bodies lay scattered across the concrete floor, and 3 wounded survivors were secured with zip ties. "Boss," Herbert's voice came through the earpiece. Police and fire response approximately 10 minutes out. Someone called in the explosions. Corey had anticipated this as well. Vernon, initiate cleanup protocol. Francisco, prep the survivors for transport. The cleanup protocol was a system Corey had developed during his early days as a private investigator, when he'd occasionally needed to make evidence disappear. Industrial acid would eliminate DNA evidence. Thermite charges would destroy electronic devices, and strategic placement of accelerants would ensure any remaining evidence was consumed by fire. But the 3 survivors were transported to a secondary location, an abandoned mine shaft 40 miles outside the city. Corey needed information about the full scope of the conspiracy before he eliminated the remaining threats. 2 hours later, Catherine Norton was secured to a chair in the mine's main chamber, her professional composure finally cracking under the weight of her situation. "Your wife hired me 6 months ago," she admitted. "Said she needed help eliminating a dangerous husband who was becoming suspicious. The plan was to stage a kidnapping, get access to your client files, liquidate your assets, and make your death look like retaliation from one of your cases." "Who else was involved?" "Just us. Jeanette, her mother, Walsh, and me. Your wife said you were paranoid, but predictable, that you'd respond exactly like a concerned father when your daughter was threatened." Corey absorbed this information while cleaning his weapons. She was right. I did respond like a concerned father. I eliminated every threat to my child's safety. She's waiting for confirmation that you're dead. When Walsh doesn't report in, she'll assume the plan failed and try to disappear. "No," Corey said quietly. "She won't run. She's too arrogant to believe she can lose to someone she's been manipulating for 15 years. She'll wait for dawn, then go to the warehouse to see what went wrong." Catherine Norton's eyes widened as she realized the implications. "You're going to kill your own wife." "Jeanette stopped being my wife the moment she orchestrated an attack on my daughter. Now, she's just another predator that needs to be eliminated." The mine shaft was deep enough that the sounds wouldn't carry to the surface. When Corey emerged 2 hours later, the conspiracy against his family had been permanently resolved, and the location of several $1 million in stolen assets had been recovered. Dawn was breaking as he drove back toward the city. His phone contained a text message from Jeanette. "Haven't heard from you. Getting worried. Call me when you get this." Corey smiled and typed back. "Everything went perfectly. Coming home soon. Love you." It would be the last lie he ever told his wife. When he arrived at the Riverside Hotel penthouse suite, Jeanette Harrell Nixon would finally meet the man she'd married. Not the gentle father and husband she'd been manipulating, but the predator who'd survived Afghanistan and eliminated every threat to his family's safety. The woman who'd spent months planning his destruction was about to learn that some betrayals carried a death sentence. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. At 6:43 a.m., Corey Nixon stood in the elevator of the Riverside Hotel, ascending to the penthouse suite where his wife waited for confirmation of his death. He'd cleaned the blood from his hands and changed into fresh clothes, but the tactical knife remained strapped to his thigh and the suppressed pistol was tucked against his spine. Smart move. Kids don't need to be exposed to this kind of violence. Hood closed the file. We're classifying this as gang-related homicides. No family involvement suspected. Insurance companies might drag their feet on the life insurance payout, but that's standard procedure. After leaving the police station, Corey drove to his office to begin the process of rebuilding his life. His business had already received 3 new high-profile cases in the past week. Word traveled fast in certain circles that Corey Nixon was someone who could handle situations that required discretion and permanent solutions. The Randall Steele case had concluded successfully, with Corey's client receiving a settlement worth $47 million. Steele's gratitude had come in the form of a generous bonus and referrals to other wealthy individuals who valued privacy and results above legal niceties. But Corey's most important business was personal. He spent the afternoon reviewing financial records and legal documents, ensuring that his wife's death would result in the clean transfer of all assets to himself and Myra. Jeanette's debts, including the gambling obligations her mother had accumulated, would die with her, leaving no complications for his daughter's future. At sunset, he drove to Bruce Eastman's compound to collect Myra. She ran to him the moment he arrived, her small arms wrapping around his waist with desperate strength. "Daddy, I missed you so much. Is Mommy really dead?" "Yes, sweetheart. Some very bad people hurt her, but they can't hurt anyone else now." Myra was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the resilience that children sometimes displayed in the face of trauma. "Are you sad?" Corey considered the question carefully. He felt no grief for Jeanette. The woman he'd mourned had been a fiction, a carefully constructed mask designed to manipulate his emotions. What he felt was relief that the threat to his daughter had been permanently eliminated, and satisfaction that justice had been served to those who'd betrayed his trust. But Myra needed a father who could help her process complex emotions, not a predator who saw the world in terms of threats and targets. "I'm sad that you lost your mother," he said finally. "And I'm angry that bad people try to hurt our family. But I'm grateful that you're safe, and I'm proud that you were brave when things got scary." That night, in the guest room at Bruce's compound, Corey tucked his daughter in a bed and answered her questions about what would happen next. "Will we move away from Westfield? Would you like to?" "I don't want to go back to that house. It doesn't feel safe anymore." Corey understood. The house where Jeanette had hosted criminal meetings and planned his murder would never feel like home to either of them. "We'll find a new place, somewhere with better security and room for you to grow up safely." "Will Uncle Bruce come with us?" "If you'd like him to." Uncle Bruce and some of his friends are very good at keeping families safe from bad people. Myra nodded sleepily. "I like Uncle Bruce. He taught me how to throw knives today." "Did he now?" Corey smiled despite himself. Bruce's idea of appropriate child development was unconventional but effective. A daughter who could defend herself would never be helpless against predators. "Daddy, the bad people who hurt Mommy, they can't come back, right?" "No, sweetheart. They can never come back. I made sure of that." 3 months later, Corey and Myra Nixon settled into a sprawling ranch house in rural Montana, 2 hours from the nearest city and surrounded by land that offered clear sight lines in all directions. Bruce Eastman and his security team maintained a compound on the adjacent property, providing both companionship and protection. The house was equipped with military-grade security systems, reinforced safe rooms, and enough weaponry to repel a small army. Myra's bedroom had 2 exits and bulletproof windows. The property had underground bunkers stocked with enough supplies to survive a siege. To visiting social workers and school officials, it looked like the home of a concerned father who'd taken reasonable precautions after his family had been targeted by criminals. In reality, it was a fortress designed by a man who understood that predators would always exist and that the only reliable protection was the capacity for overwhelming retaliation. Myra adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience. She excelled in her new school, made friends with the children of Bruce's team, and began training in self-defense techniques that would serve her well if she ever faced another threat. Most importantly, she never asked about the details of her mother's death or expressed any desire to return to their old life. Children were remarkably good at recognizing genuine safety and Myra instinctively understood that her father had eliminated the dangers that had threatened their family. The nightmares stopped after 6 months. The hypervigilance faded after a year. By her 14th birthday, Myra Nixon was a confident, capable young woman who could field-strip a rifle, detect surveillance, and disappear into wilderness terrain if necessary. She was also happy, loved, and protected by people who would kill anyone who threatened her welfare. Chapter 9. The Price of Betrayal. 5 years after the events that destroyed his first family, Corey Nixon stood on the deck of his Montana ranch, watching his 17-year-old daughter practice tactical driving with Bruce Eastman. Myra had grown into a formidable young woman, intelligent, confident, and lethal when necessary. More importantly, she was happy and secure in ways that would have been impossible if he'd chosen forgiveness over justice. The notification on his encrypted phone broke his contemplation. Vernon Lord's message was brief. Package delivered. Problem resolved. The problem had been Frank Dixon, a former associate of Jeanette's who'd recently been released from federal prison and had made the mistake of trying to contact Myra through social media. Dixon had apparently believed that enough time had passed for him to safely approach the Nixon family about unfinished business related to his deceased partners. Vernon's solution had been characteristically efficient. Dixon's death would be attributed to a prison rivalry that had followed him into civilian life. No connection to the Nixon family, no loose ends, no future complications. It was the 7th such resolution in 5 years. Word had spread through certain criminal networks that Corey Nixon's family was permanently off-limits, but occasionally someone would test that boundary. Each test resulted in swift, brutal elimination that reinforced the message. Betraying the Nixon family was a capital offense. "Dad, watch this." Myra's voice carried across the practice course as she executed a perfect J-turn at 40 miles per hour, her Mustang sliding sideways before straightening out with military precision. Corey smiled and applauded. His daughter had inherited his tactical instincts and his capacity for controlled violence, but she'd also developed the emotional intelligence and moral compass that his own upbringing had failed to provide. She would never be a victim, but she would also never become the kind of predator who targeted innocents. That evening, over dinner at the ranch house, Bruce raised the subject that had been on everyone's mind for months. The girl's ready for college, Corey. MIT accepted her early admission application. Full scholarship for computer science and cybersecurity. Myra looked between the two men, sensing the undercurrent of their conversation. "You're worried about me being away from the compound. College campuses aren't secure environments," Corey said carefully. "Lots of unknown variables, limited control over access and surveillance. Dad, I can't live in a fortress forever, and MIT has one of the best cybersecurity programs in the world. I want to learn how to protect people the way you've protected me." The conversation continued for hours, covering security protocols, communication procedures, and contingency plans. By the end of the evening, they developed a framework that would allow Myra to attend college while maintaining the safety measures that had kept her alive and free from threats. Francisco Huber would relocate to Cambridge and establish a security perimeter around the campus. Herbert Lloyd would provide long-range overwatch from strategic positions in the city. Vernon Lord would handle electronic surveillance and communication security. It was expensive and complex, but Corey had learned that no price was too high to pay for his daughter's safety and future. 2 years later, Myra graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees in computer science and criminal justice. Her senior thesis on digital forensics techniques had been classified by the Department of Homeland Security and resulted in job offers from every major federal law enforcement agency. She chose instead to return to Montana and join her father's private investigation business, which had expanded into a specialized security consulting firm that served high-net-worth individuals and corporations facing complex threats. Nixon Security Solutions employed former military personnel exclusively and had developed a reputation for resolving problems that traditional law enforcement couldn't handle. Their client list was confidential, their methods were effective, and their success rate was 100%. The business thrived because Corey had learned the fundamental truth that most people refuse to acknowledge. In a world full of predators, survival required either accepting victimhood or becoming a more dangerous predator than those who threatened you. On Myra's 21st birthday, father and daughter sat on the same deck where Corey had once watched her practice tactical driving. She was now a full partner in the business, with her own team and her own cases. More importantly, she was alive, successful, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her welfare. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Killing Mom and the others instead of trying to work things out?" Corey considered the question seriously. "Do you remember being scared? Being hurt? Being used as bait to manipulate me? I remember feeling helpless and confused. I remember thinking you might not be able to save me. Your mother was willing to let strangers torture you to further her scheme. She chose money over your safety, criminal associates over family loyalty. That wasn't a marriage problem or a communication issue. That was a fundamental character defect that would have eventually gotten you killed." Myra nodded slowly. "I've studied the psychological profiles you compiled on all of them. Mom scored higher for psychopathy than most serial killers. She wasn't going to change or get better with therapy. Predators don't reform, sweetheart. They just get better at hiding their true nature until they see an opportunity to strike. Your mother had been planning my murder for years, possibly from the beginning of our marriage. The only thing that stopped her from eventually targeting you directly was my intervention. I'm glad you saved me, Dad, and I'm glad you taught me to save myself." That night, as Corey performed his evening security check of the compound, he reflected on the choices that had brought him to this point. He'd lost his first wife to her own criminal nature, but he'd gained a daughter who understood that strength and vigilance were the prices of safety in a dangerous world. The predators who tried to destroy his family were dead and forgotten. The threats that had once kept him awake at night had been permanently eliminated. Most importantly, the people he loved were safe, secure, and capable of defending themselves against whatever